So our problem here is giving us that angle ABC and CBD are complementary. Here's ABC and here is CBD. So we're talking about those two angles are comp. And then it's also giving us that DBE and CBD form a right angle. So we're talking about those two angles form a right angle. And we're trying to prove that ABC congruent to DBE. We're trying to prove this angle is congruent to this angle over here. Okay. So then this is our first angle proof, and when you look at it and you think, oh, what does complementary mean? Well, it means it adds up to it adds up to 90 degrees. And then you think, oh, well, what's a right angle mean? Well, that means it adds up to 90 degrees. You kind of think that these say the same thing, but they are two separate statements. Okay, so that's one thing that you need to understand. So let's go ahead and start by writing the givens down in our first statement. So it's going to be angle ABC and angle CBD comp. And then also angle DBE and angle CBD form right angle. And that's going to be given. Okie dokie. So what do we need? Well, we want to say that angle ABC is congruent to angle DBE. Okay. And if you remember from our proof sheet, we can do that using congruent supplements theorem. Congruent comps theorem. Okay. And what does congruent comps theorem say? It says if we have two angles complement to the same angle, then we could say that those two angles are congruent. Okay, and so what are we going to do? So we need this second statement. Like, in order to use the congruent comps theorem, in order to use this, we need to have two separate comp statements. We need to have angle 1 comp to angle 2 as a statement. And we need another statement that says angle 2 comp to angle 3. So once you have the two comp statements, then you could think about which angle is comp to the same angle. Which angles are comp to the same angle. And you could say that those two angles are congruent. The reason is congruent comps theorem. So we have one comp statement. It's right here. It's our first statement. We need to convert this statement, angle DBE and angle CBD form a right angle, into a comp statement. Okay, and so how do we do that? Well, if we're looking on our proof sheet down here in the angle section, right, what are we given? We're given forms a right angle. Two angles form a right angle. There's only one theorem on this sheet that starts with if we have a right angle. Oh, actually we have two. We have definition of right angles also, right? If we have right angle, we could say the equation angle is equal to 90 degrees, or measure of the angle is equal to 90. But there's only one other one that says if we have two angles that form a right angle, right? And so does this one say it? This one? No, right? It's this one right here. So this one is saying if we have two adjacent angles and they form a right angle, then we could say that two angles are comp using complements theorem. Alternatively, if we have two angles that form a linear pair, if we have linear pair as a statement, then we could say those two angles are sup using sup theorem. Okay. From sup, you can go ahead and use definition of supplementary angles and get an equation. Right. From comp, you can use definition of complementary angles, get an equation. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and say that the two angles are comp. Because what does complement theorem let us say? It says if we have two angles or a right angle, two adjacent angles form a right angle, then we can say the two angles are comp. And looking at our figure here, we have these two adjacent angles, and it's telling us it forms a right angle. So we can use that theorem, the comp theorem, right? And we're going to go ahead and say angle DBE and angle CBD comp. And the reason is comp theorem. Okay, now we have two comp statements. We have this first comp statement and we have the second comp statement. Okay. Now what does that do? That unlocks this theorem, this theorem here, congruent complements theorem. And what does congruent comps theorem say? It says if we have two angles comp to the same angle, then those two angles are congruent. Okay? So we look at our two comp statements, and do we have two separate angles comp to the same angle? Well, if you look at it, we do, because we have ABC comp to CBD. We have DBE comp to CBD. So we have two angles comp to the same angle. So what are we able to say? We're able to say angle ABC is congruent to angle DBE, and the reason is going to be congruent comps theorem. Okay. Yeah, so I guess that's all we need to say about that. The lesson here, I guess, is that if we're trying to use the congruent comps theorem, we have to have two statements that say two angles are comp, right?